Hello, friends. You are in for a treat today. Have you ever noticed the massive crossover with trans identities, neurodivergence, and hypermobility? Of course you have. Recent research has uncovered a striking finding. Transgender and gender diverse people appear to have a much higher prevalence of hypermobility related disorders, and conditions like hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and hypermobility spectrum disorder are just more likely if you're also trans. That's compared to cisgender individuals. So, in this retrospective study, they looked at data across 20 years and they found that hypermobility rates among AFAB trans people were 2.62% versus just 0.16% of cisgender women. And for AMAB trans people, it was 1% compared to 0.04% of cis men. This increased prevalence was found regardless of whether the trans person had undergone any sort of medical intervention, such as hormone therapy. That means that gender diverse people are genuinely more likely to also be hypermobile in some way, whether or not they've transitioned in any medical way or social way, or even if they're just non-binary people who've not done any transitioning, so to speak, and just feel like gender is stupid and they don't vibe with it as a concept. Now, how wild is that? This other study found that individuals with autism were 7 times as likely as neurotypicals to be hypermobile, and people with ADHD were 6 times as likely to be hypermobile. Why? So welcome back to Bend and Snatch. This is episode 15 with me, Penny, and today I spoke to Jessie Rard, a circus artist turned coach about all things flexibility, hypermobility, and chronic illness. So strap in. I hope that you enjoyed the episode. Jessie, hi, welcome. How you doing?
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm doing well.
Start by just telling me a bit about your circus career. What was it that you were doing when you were in the circus?
Oh, yeah. So, I started off as a circus artist. I started at about 14, but I was completely self-taught. So this was before circus kind of got really big on Instagram and then exploded and everyone kind of started knowing what it was and more studios started opening up. So this was back in 2010. I found a YouTube video of a contortion act in Cirque du Soleil, and I was just instantly hooked. Like it was that this is my new special interest, and I just started training. Tried to find anything I could on the internet about how to do that thing, and would come home from high school and just train in my parents' basement and just work out and try to figure out things, which now, of course, I know was easier for me because I have hypermobility. But at the time, who knew that? So I went to college. I worked on a dance major. I worked on some chemistry, science stuff. I ended up dropping out of college to transition because transitioning pre Obamacare, ECA, all the trans legislation that happened here in the US was difficult. And then I ended up moving to Alaska, and I was like, first of all, when I came out and transitioned, I was like, I've never seen a male contortionist at that time. And there are many. They just weren't easy to find before circus became super popular on Instagram and we all had access to each other. So I was like, I'm done. I can't be a contortionist. There are all these lithe, beautiful women. And so I'm done with circus and I have to do this other thing instead. I moved to Alaska and I was like, there's no circus up there. We must be completely done with circus. And then immediately got hired to teach flexibility at a pole studio up there. And then immediately started performing every single weekend in bars and clubs. Ended up visiting a friend in San Diego. And purely by chance, I was like, there is a circus studio. I have been the big fish in town for so long. I need to go train with somebody so that I can actually learn more. Fully planning on just bringing it back to Alaska and increasing the standard that was there. And instead of it being a circus studio, which I thought, right, a little a aerial yoga or a pole studio or one of the little studios that are everyone does this after work, it was a full-on circus school. And while I was visiting my friend and taking classes, the owner of the studio was like, here's our audition form. You can come to auditions. You can submit an audition tape. And I was like, what is going on? So I did that. Unfortunately, I went to circus school in the 2019 school year. So I was at school for almost a full school session. And then we went into lockdown in a city that I was totally new in and like had no connections in. So I moved back home to Seattle, and that's when I went through all of my long COVID, chronic illness, like mast cell activation thing for years, a couple years. And I have since moved all the way across the country to Florida. So ever since the pandemic cut circus school short for me, I made the hard pivot into just going back to being a circus coach and just fully dedicating myself to the coaching aspect of it. And that's been really great because I got to the point where I was not good enough to get to a high level of performing. And also, I don't think my body would have tolerated it either. So for a while there before I got sick, I was like, oh, well, if only I had started younger, if only I had known what this was earlier, I had access to a coach, if only this and this and that. But my body got to a point where it couldn't tolerate any kind of training for a while. So now instead of, still being in school for years, trying to raise up to that level of athletics and performance, uh, have been running my coaching business for 6 years now. And it's just grown into such an incredible thing.
Thanks so much for sharing all of that. It must have been so stressful when you got sick and you weren't able to train or perform or work anymore. How did you work through that to be able to, like, I guess, process not being able to be a professional performer, but also to get you back into being able to at least start training again?
Yeah, I ended up getting COVID only like a month or two before the vaccine became available. So I was living with my parents at the time, and we all got COVID. We were all trying work so hard to kind of hold out for the vaccine and don't go out in public very often before the vaccine because they are older, and we all got it like a couple months before the vaccine was available. And they were fine. They recovered fairly well. I took care of them during that week uh, that they were ill, and everything was reasonably fine. And then I was the one that was suddenly bedbound for a whole year. And it was so immediately after having been a full time athlete, like working out 45 hours a week, training at these really intense levels, that I went from that to I can't think properly. I can't stare at a screen at all, which means I can't even talk to my long distance friends, just like completely isolated in my parents' basement. My poor parents are saints. They just immediately took care of me and was like, "Well, you're here. You're here. You have a roof over your head, so stay here as long as it takes for us to figure this out." Um, but I took quite a bit of time off circus, and at that time, I really was like, "Okay, I'm done. I'm never going back." Even if I get out of bed, I don't know if I'm going to go back on stage. I was still running my business. So my business all but shut down, but I did still have a few clients where I would like pop open my laptop and talk them through a workout and then shut it and just slide it over on the bed and fall fast asleep. And it was like maybe 3 clients a week, like 1 hour per day. And so my business was just barely alive for a year as I was trying to figure all of that out. What we know now, right? Because at the time it was super new. This was 2021. So the vaccine had just come out. Long COVID wasn't being studied. And um, we thought, okay, you have some kind of long COVID, but nobody knows anything about long COVID.
It's hard to know for sure because I guess there's an element of like luck of the draw. But do you
Uh-huh.
think part of why it affected you so badly compared to like your parents was because of other underlying health things?
Yes, my mother does not have HEDS. It does run in her family. I did get it from her side of the family, but so I have it. I have a twin sister. She is hypermobile, but she doesn't really qualify for that like full diagnostic criteria. And so now we know that it was my hypermobility that predisposed me to having mast cell activation syndrome. And there are finally, I mean, as of late 2025, just this last half of the year, studies on how the COVID spike protein triggers mast cell activation syndrome with how it interacts with our collagen and the mast cells that live on the collagen and makes them kind of go haywire. So now we finally have some science to back it up, which I'm loving diving into and reading studies as much as I can on it. But it is cool to finally have some reading material on the subject after living through that period of no one knows what's going on. And, suddenly I'm a 25, 26-year-old that can't stand up. Like, that's wild.
So then in the research that you were looking at that came out this year, it showed that hypermobile people were just more likely to have more severe effects from COVID.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah,
that is
hypermobility
crazy.
predisposes us to a lot more severe effects, not only from COVID, but from things like mono, like the Epstein-Barr virus. Any viral infection can do this, but there is some things in the COVID spike protein that are increasing the amounts of mast cell activation that happen.
Do you still have ongoing side effects from having COVID?
I would say it's not from COVID at this point. There is some question of, did I have any mast cell activation symptoms throughout my life that I just didn't know what they were and they all got worse post-COVID? There is some question of like, does COVID produce this chronic illness of MCAS in us, or did it just amplify it? Um, so I do still have mast cell activation syndrome. It is chronic. It's not going to go away. I am currently in remission, which I'm super thankful for. And so this all started in 2021, and I am in remission as of a few months ago, like September 2025. I'm in this position where I finally feel like my brain fog is gone. I'm kind of at peak ability again and getting really, really excited about coaching again now, fully.
That's so nice. I'm so glad to hear that.
Thank you.
Can we talk a little bit about the different types of hypermobility?
This is currently all being reevaluated. So I don't know if you've seen the Road to 2026. There is a new genomic study from the EDS Society combined with a huge amount of information gathering from people who are diagnosed with various types of EDS and living with hypermobility spectrum disorder and all that kind of stuff. So in about a year, a bunch of these definitions could change, and we don't really know what the end result of the study is going to be. But for now, there are 13 or 14 subtypes of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and the only one that does not have a genetic test that will tell you the diagnosis is the hypermobile type. And that's where, so we have hypermobile type EDS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and we also have hypermobility spectrum disorder, which is now pretty highly debated as whether it's truly a separate entity or not. So the hypermobile type EDS criteria is from 2017. And the people who are in pain and have symptoms and are having their life be affected but don't cleanly meet the 2017 criteria are being labeled as hypermobility spectrum disorder. So it's still a disorder. It's still negatively affecting your life. It's not benign in any way, but you supposedly don't have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And that's what the road to 2027 is aiming to fix. Because the current belief among most specialists is that it's all a spectrum, and dividing it randomly between HEDS and HSD has not been the best for patients. Yeah.
When most people think of hypermobility, they also think of flexibility as though it's the same thing. So then a lot of people were really confused to find out that they're hypermobile because they can't touch their toes. Why might that be happening?
Ooh, yes, that's my favorite question. I'm sure you've also had clients that are dealing with this right as well, where you're like, "Hey, I'm seeing some things during our session." And they're like, "No, no, 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 no. I can't touch my toes." And I'm in circus, so the bar, I tell all my clients and students. I'm like, stop following 12-year-old Russian circus artists on Instagram, because that's the only reason why you don't think you have EDS, is because you're not a 12-year-old Russian gymnast, right? So once you're in circus, the bar is so much higher that everyone I talk to is like, I couldn't possibly. I can't touch my toes, let alone do, or even if they can, even if they have a full split. Oh, I'm not her 12-year-old Russian, kid doing crazy things. So when you have any kind of hypermobility, I would say along this spectrum of how it can affect the body, I almost like to say the worse it is, the less stable your joints are, the more likely you are to not be flexible. So some of my clients that I see having way more hypermobility in their joints, joint laxity, bones that can kind of shift and move around easily, they are much less likely to actually be flexible because there's no safety in that wobbly system. So we have our connective tissue, and if it's not doing its job, the nervous system's funneling through all of those muscles and joints and going, holy shit, guys, please don't fall apart. And then it triggers this really intense muscular reaction of that muscle tension that keeps us from being able to do things like touch our toes or do the splits. But it also makes you feel perpetually tight in your system as well. So some of my clients will say, I feel really tight all the time. And these are pole dancers who I've seen do incredibly flexible moves. So I'll do a little bit of joint mobility testing where I will, for example, hold the weight of their arm and have them relax completely. Instead of testing their control over their flexibility, I just do a little, I'm going to move your arm and your shoulder, completely relax, and I can really feel how much joint laxity there is in there. And then I go, okay, but you still feel tight. As soon as I let go and you hold the weight of your arm, suddenly it all goes away.
It's wild, isn't it? How our perceptions as hypermobile people of our own bodies can be so separate from what is actually going on. Like that
Yes.
feeling of tightness when you are, in fact, more mobile than the person next to you. It's those muscles just trying to protect you so you're not just falling over and being
It's
jelly.
your entire system, right? Your nervous system and your muscles just being like, we need to do whatever we can to gain safety. And that's why I've seen so much incredible progress when I'm introducing weightlifting to these clients. All they're doing is the tricks. And then we introduce some weightlifting, we get the strength up, and suddenly the people who are tight just kind of magically unlock this range of motion just because it now feels safe. And so, like you were saying earlier, flexibility is an incredibly long, hard journey. And that's just how the body is. It's supposed to be a long, slow process.
Part of that stiffness that you feel as well, especially as you get older, you've probably hurt yourself a lot of times in the past, and your body is trying so desperately to protect you. I think that's what's
Mm-hmm.
happening with me with my middle split. Because when I was
Yeah.
younger, I would just drop into the split. That was my party trick. Loved doing it at parties, theatre class. That was my thing. And I'm fairly certain now I've probably done something to my hip. I'm still so far away, but I'm trying to be so sensible in the way that I approach it now that I know that
Yes.
I'm hypermobile and now that I'm also old. Just trying to be really sensible so that I can still walk tomorrow,
You're
you
like
know?
30. I don't know how old you are
I'm
actually.
almost 37.
Ooh, it's
I'm
it's
closer
that
to
EDS
40.
skin. It's that no wrinkles hypermobile skin.
Hypermobile skin, and also I think being gay. I think gay people age better than
I
straight
do
people
too,
do for
actually.
for a couple of reasons. I'm going on a tangent now, but
This is great.
here's my TED talk. So, gay people age better. Specifically, I think probably lesbians age better than straight
Yeah.
people because you don't spend that much time with men who think that they can tell you what to do. I think that really saves you a lot of stress. You probably don't have kids unless you like really desperately wanted them. You've not
Yes,
accidentally had kids that you don't want. That also
that's
really
a big
makes
one.
a massive difference. And those are the two main ones, I think. And also, I dress in
I'm just gonna
clothes that
say
probably make me seem younger.
that's fair, but I will say, as far as like skin health um and kind of stress levels, the orgasm gap. Just saying, as far as why all the lesbians look much younger.
See, also that. So that's like 4 things, right?
Yeah.
5 things if we include my hypermobile skin.
Now that's the interesting thing, because the overlap is not sexuality. The overlap is gender. Not I was about to say gender expression, but it's not that. There is actually a 4-part Venn diagram. I guess you could split it up into 3-part or 4-part, but it is autism, ADHD, which if you want to just combine it into neurodiversity, right? Hypermobility, like clinical hypermobility, HEDS, HSD, and trans experience. So non-binary, trans people who are pursuing actual medical transition, the whole spectrum of any non-cisgender gender identity. And that's our like 3 to 4-part Venn diagram. And it is fascinating, but it means that my clients are fantastic. I get to work with the very best people.
It's wild, isn't it? I think I saw a study that was like, if you're autistic, you're 7 times more likely to also be hypermobile.
Mhm.
And if you've got ADHD, I think it's 6 times more likely to be
Yes,
hypermobile
exactly. Which is
than
the
a
main
neurotypical
reason
person.
why they kind of split this up into a 4-part Venn diagram, because it is genuinely, there is a little more of a predisposition. I do not have a diagnosis yet. I have appointments in the future to get tested for autism. My twin sister recently got her ADHD diagnosis. And so I'm looking at the two of us just as this kind of case study, and kind of as talking to my clients and adding to all this anecdotal information. But here's a set of twins where one's trans and one is mostly cisgender. My sister was occasionally throws in the they them pronouns occasionally, and she's just like, I'm not super attached to being a woman, but I was born like this, so like I don't really care that much. Let's roll with it, right? Where I had to transition. She has an ADHD diagnosis. I seem to fall a little more towards the autism, and I am the one that is much more disabled by my hypermobility, even though she also is hypermobile, but not necessarily the like clinical diagnosis type of it, or the disabling type of hypermobility. So we're just like a little bit off, and that ADHD versus autism can potentially be the difference between benign asymptomatic hypermobility and more disabling areas of the hypermobile spectrum.
It's so interesting. And I look forward to the future where there's actually more information about this. One of the theories that I've seen on why this might be happening is that in neurodivergent bodies, because it's all about that elasticity of like stuff, your brain is also stuff. So like if your skin is more stretchy and your organs are more stretchy, which is also why a lot of neurodivergent people also have like gut issues, because their guts are also
Yes.
more stretchy, their brains are probably also more stretchy. Like all of it is the same because we're all just made out of stuff.
Yes.
Very
And I
scientific
had
terms.
somebody recently ask me, why are trans people more likely to be hypermobile? And I was like, it's not, because they were like, hey, there's some kind of genetic component to hypermobility, even though for the hypermobile type of EDS, we haven't found one specific gene yet. There is some really promising studies. There's a few possible genes. And so it may be like, if you have one of these 5 genes, that could get you a diagnosis in the future. Possibly. We'll see. I hope it's easier in the future to get a diagnosis. But this person was saying, so there's some genetic component. We don't know. We haven't pinned it down yet. But what if there's a similar gene that produces hypermobility and trans identity? And I was like, great theory. However, the link is neurodivergence, because the people who are experiencing trans identity and hypermobility, it's mostly the non-binary population. So I joke about trans identity being like I'm autistic and gender roles make no sense and I'm going to throw them in the trash versus like, give me medical attention right now. I need to transition. And there's absolutely an overlap. It's still, all of it's still a spectrum, but this non-binary portion is kind of where I see that connection, that overlap point being, where you're just kind of like, I don't care about gender because your rules don't make sense to me. And so it's that autism overlap that seems to be the strongest overlap between the two.
So I am non-binary and also hypermobile and also have ADHD. I may or may not have autism. Everyone keeps telling me that I do, but I don't
We
know.
call that peer reviewed.
Everyone else thinks I'm autistic, but who knows? You don't get any medication for being autistic, so I've never pursued a diagnosis because it doesn't seem very helpful. Whereas at least with ADHD, they can give me some speed to help me through my day. So that seems
Right?
more useful to find out.
Yes.
But yeah, it's definitely a thing. And I find it really interesting. And sometimes it's a bit frustrating because I think, especially for like younger autistic trans people, I think it's used as a way of being like, you're not really trans, you're just autistic.
Yes.
Which is so frustrating because they're not just being trans because it's like fashionable in autistic circles. The autistic kids are just the ones more likely probably to be like, this is stupid, I'm just going to be myself. Whereas the not autistic trans kids are more likely to be like, I guess I'll just do what I'm told.
It's been fascinating to see the overlaps in neurodiversity with different trans identities and how people are expressing themselves.
Let's talk a little bit about some common pains that hypermobile people will struggle with. So
Yes.
I guess one of the most common ones is that like neck pain, right? Top of your back, kind of in your traps, bottom of your neck.
Across the shoulders, yeah, the coat hanger, the grumpy little triangle.
Why is this happening? Why do so many hypermobile people all have this like matching pain where every day they're like, oh, I think I slept wrong?
So there are a lot of joints and there's a lot of connective tissue in that area. So I have not found any scientific reason for like, this is exactly the one reason why coat hanger pain exists, but craniocervical instability is also something that is very common with hypermobility. So any kind of instability in the neck, in the cervical spine, in the way the head sits on the neck, that kind of thing. So we have all those little joints, which very small muscles, right? Supporting our like 8-pound skull. So very small muscles, tons of connective tissue, tons of area for potential joint laxity, potential hypermobility. And then that connects down to, are you kidding me? The shoulders, which you have the ball inside the socket, like the shoulder joint here, but you have the scapula as well, and you have the absolute mess that is the clavicles, right, with the different connection points there. And there's just an immense amount of connective tissue in the same place where some of the smallest muscles exist, right? Aside from hands and feet, which do also tend to have quite a bit of pain and quite a bit of joint laxity for people. So when you're looking at like, why is it here instead of my hip, for example? Still a lot of connective tissue there, but also very big stabilizing muscles, much bigger bone connection points, depending on the depth of the hip socket and the angle of the hip socket and things like that. So I believe it's just the sheer amount of that kind of connective tissue versus larger muscle strength.
What are some things that people can do to mitigate that pain and maybe even make it go away?
Generally, we're using our upper traps so much. They want to kick on and do everything. And it's something that now I feel like people are actually very familiar with. You say, oh, yeah, your upper traps are overworking. And if they've been in any fitness space, they're like, that sounds familiar. I have heard of that before. So we don't have to explain that too in depth to a lot of people now, which is nice. But utilizing the mid trap, the low trap, the rhomboids, the things that stabilize the scapula is going to do a huge service to being able to offload the upper traps. I do believe that strengthening the upper traps even further is going to help because they're tight and they're overworked. But you'd have to assess the individual to see if they're actually strong or if they're just holding on for dear life. So spreading out that load, strengthening the whole segment. Neck strength is a great one, especially if there's any amount of hypermobility or cervical instability. The amount of my clients who did not realize that your head comfortably touching your back muscles is not normal. That's a fun one. When I tell people that's not normal, they're like, but it's so comfortable. Why is my body built like that if it's not a pillow? I don't understand. The other thing I see that's really pulling on all of that is really tight pecs. So assessing what kind of pec tightness exists, which happens, right? It's pulling the shoulders forward, which means we are no longer in a good position to engage and strengthen all of that upper back in the posterior section there with like rhomboids. And you get that scapula winging happening as well with hypermobility. And so there's a lot of release the front, strengthen the back kind of stability work to do. And also, there is such a huge overlap between HEDS and HSD, so clinical hypermobility, let's say, and mast cell activation syndrome. And for a lot of people, their pain isn't always coming from the joint instability. It can be coming from that overactive mast cell, the histamine release, all of the inflammation. A ton of pain from my mast cell activation syndrome before we got it in check. So I'm always looking at, depending on how hypermobile somebody is in front of me and how many other body parts they're talking about, right? When you also, like you said, you start talking about the gut, you start talking about any kind of fatigue, brain fog, mental health symptoms. Once you start talking about multiple body systems, then I start looking at, is stability going to help you fully? Or do we need to talk about all of the other things going on in the body and that inflammation and controlling histamine and things like that to like fully control the pain?
It's frustrating that it's so difficult to get any sort of help from doctors most of the time.
Yes.
So then with stuff like this, if you go and try and talk to a doctor, trying to convince them to run tests in the UK is
Yes.
so difficult because they don't want to pay for anything.
No.
So it can, like, I think on average in the UK to get an EDS diagnosis is like 10 years or something absurd.
Same
And
for in the US, actually. Yeah.
it's bonkers. And I think trying to get doctors to like see the big picture is really hard. I went, because I'm getting old, I want them to be able to think about things as things start happening. So I was like, I want you to write down that I'm hypermobile. It feels important that you know it because there are lots of like comorbidities. And if I come in telling you about something, I want you to think about it. And the GP that I spoke to was like, I don't know how to test you for that. I was like, what do you mean? Firstly, you could do it right now in this room.
Yeah.
And secondly, I can talk you through it if you want. And she's like, no, I don't know how to do that. But then when I went and
memorized.
saw a physio about my hands hurting, and I told him I was hypermobile, and he was like, yeah. And I was like, can you just write it down somewhere? He's like, okay. I was like, that'll do.
As a circus artist, I feel like we have this secret club that's like, we're like reparenting our inner child that like could not do the monkey bars by then becoming like athletes and pole dancers and circus artists that can now do the monkey bars. It's like the whole goal is just, we got you there eventually, kid.
I think a lot of hypermobile people, if they do end up in any sort of sport, will end up in flexibility-based sports because we're just better at it. When I was younger, I used to do taekwondo, and I was the most flexible person in the class. So I was like, cool, I'm going to get a splits. I'm going to be able to kick everyone in the head because everyone was taller than me as well. So being able to do the splits meant that I could kick everyone in the head, and that felt very important. But like, I didn't know I was hypermobile. I don't know if anyone else even knew what that meant. So a lot of my flexibility training as a kid was like adults standing on me. And I don't
Yes.
think that was great.
Not great. Not great. I'm so glad that
Not
the
great.
education around it is increasing. You know, in gymnastics and in martial arts, it used to be just sit on your students, stand on them, push them into positions. And I'm just so glad that I am seeing a change throughout the industry. It is still happening more in gymnastics and martial arts and in things that have this like, well, this is the way it's always been done. This is a traditional thing. There is stuff happening in dance and in pole and circus that is like active flexibility based. Do not push your clients into things. But yeah, we get into these sports that require flexibility because, oh, we're just naturally good at this. Awesome. I guess I'll do this. And also the amount of like sensory seeking, right? Like in pole and circus, you're spinning a lot. So we have a lot of that like neurodivergent sensory seeking with the ease of hypermobility. And then you're like perfectly creating a dancer or a circus artist or a pole dancer who then later is going to go, oh, why does all of this hurt? Like what's happening now that I am mid 20s to 30s is usually when it starts being like 20 to 30, depending on the severity of the joint instabilities. Like, what's happening? I was so good at this before.
I've always had joints that hurt. So when I was younger, my knees always hurt and my wrists always hurt. My ankles always hurt. I would hurt my ankles all the time. And whenever I went to the doctor, they'd just tell my mum that they were growing pains. I am 5'2".
Yeah.
I have not grown. that was not
With
it.
not growing pains. I was already this height, okay?
No growing has happened. And through my 20s, like knee pain, wrist pain, ankle pain, some like lower back pain, all of the places where I'm too bendy, basically. They would just always be hurting. And honestly, learning to lift is the best thing that I have ever done. And like learning how to be intentional with my movement as well, to like move on purpose and not just flail around. Because I think especially the combination of ADHD and hypermobility, those are people who just flail around and they'll just like fling themselves about and see what happens. And then we get hurt. Yeah. Learning to not do that, to like, okay, I'm going to contract my quad muscle now. Contract. I'm going to lift my leg up by contracting my quad and also my hip flexors and also my abs. Ready? Contract. And it's fucking boring.
It is. And that's the thing is, this is where the autism can be a superpower because my poor ADHD folks are like, I am bored out of my freaking mind. Let me go spin now. And my autistic baddies are like locked in at the gym. They're like, we don't care that this is boring. I'm gonna just focus. I'm just gonna pour myself into this and just go. Trying to program and work with people who are like, okay, in order to make this okay, I'm gonna lift as fast as possible. Right? You get those ones where I'm like, I'm going to count your reps for you. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Yeah, like just makes and it's awful because where's the dopamine in that, right? Until you get a heavy enough weight. So trying to like give my clients these little like dopamine hits and throw it in there while still getting them to slow down and trying to figure out how to improve somebody's interoception, right? Because you fling yourself about and also, can you even feel that contracting? Does your brain even have a map of where your hip flexors are in the first place? The biggest thing in my flexibility classes is once I can get somebody to find their hip flexors, and it takes a couple months. And then as soon as that happens, they go, oh, that's what my hamstrings feel like in a stretch. Okay, I've suddenly moved this stretch from my lower back to my hamstrings. And then they make this huge amount of progress. But we spend so much time just working on this like hip hinge and cat-cow type movements. Where even is your hip flexor? Like poke at it with your fingers so your brain can try to make that connection down there.
I'll get a lot of my clients to basically twerk in various positions.
Yes.
It's ridiculous, but it's so useful. And you can do it anywhere. And if you can do it from standing up or like from down or from like leaning in all the positions, eventually you learn how to make your hips hit. Everyone laughs at me when I give it to them because they think I'm joking, but I'm
Oh,
not.
it's so
It's
great.
important.
And my flexibility classes that are in a pole studio, they're like, yes, twerk time. Everyone else is like, what? Until they get on the twerk wagon as well. But we were joking at first. I was like, middle splits class is just twerk time.
That's totally
It's so
valid.
good. It's so good.
What do you think are the main training considerations for hypermobile people who want to start lifting or start training flexibility?
Yes. Once again, just always the medical side of this is always on my mind. I think one of the biggest first considerations is I always try to ask people symptomology questions to figure out if they're dealing with any kind of POTS, dysautonomia, MCAS, right? Because if there is any kind of postural dizziness occurring, that's going to change what I program for them. It's also going to change the the volume that I'm programming, because what if they're dealing with then like post-exertional malaise and things like that, that's going to hinder their progress. So I always try to kind of talk around those components and just ask some questions and try to see if I can get some answers, because people don't know that they're dealing with these things. They just, oh, I just get dizzy a few times. It's normal, right? If that is not a consideration, if it's purely joint hypermobility, I think then the next step I'm looking at is what kind of workouts are going to work for your neurotype? Like, how much proprioception are we dealing with? How much interoception are we dealing with? What kind of cueing am I going to use depending on how in touch with their body they're in? After that would be not offloading these people, because they get told lightweight, high reps, this is how you keep yourself safe. And it's absolutely not. Now, it's not like go pick up 100 pounds immediately, but there is a sweet spot where if, say, even if somebody's pretty undertrained, if I'm spotting them and we do 10-pound in each hand dumbbell, like bench press, chest press, it's going to wobble all over the place because there's so many options in those shoulders and there's not enough force to kick the proprioception on. So there's that sweet spot of like, I'll give them 10 pounds just to make sure they're not going to drop something on themselves. And then they'll be really confused. And I'll be like, don't worry about it. Don't let that stick in your head. You were confused. It's fine. Here's 15s. Boom. It locks right in. 15 to 20 pounds, especially for my like less conditioned people or people who are like, can't do a push-up, things like that. And the brain locks right in. You get just enough stimulus that proprioception is somehow, the brain is like, this is necessary. You know, we need this, otherwise we might be in danger. And that proprioception just pops in out of nowhere. And suddenly you have less joint options and you're just grooving.
I love that you said that. That's generally my approach as well. Like, if you make it heavier, people are more likely to actually brace because it becomes more obvious what bracing means. It's more intuitive. Humans are inherently lazy anyway, so even if you're not hypermobile or neurodivergent, if I hand you something that is light, it's really difficult to convince all of the muscles that we're trying to train to participate if they don't need to, because why am I going to waste extra energy for? And making stuff harder makes it easier. It makes it make more sense to a person in their body how to actually do a thing. Sometimes if I don't want to make it heavier necessarily because it's already hard, like if we're doing single leg squats or like V-stance squats or something, I'll get them to just bear hug a wall ball. So then the ball only weighs 3 kilos. It's not adding any heaviness, but because they're crushing it, that's making them create some tension, and then it's starting to make sense what tension feels like. So then they can move more smoothly.
Nice, because it's also different muscles than what we're using. So if you can like squeeze the core, squeeze the chest by hugging something really tight while you're doing legs, then suddenly the legs aren't the one over contracting. Because that's the thing I've seen a lot, is this like constant full body tension where you're bearing down with all your muscles at the same time. And suddenly you have no contractile capacity left, right, to even go into these movements. You lose all your depth and range of motion. And so getting my clients to try to figure out this theory of like a muscle that is relaxed is ready to take on whatever task you're giving it.
Something I think circus performers are really good at that I cannot do is the ability to like relax your face
Oh,
when
yes.
you're doing hard things. Whenever I
Yes.
train with friends who are professional circus people, we'll be doing
Yes.
like a split session and then they'll be like in these hard places and I'm literally just like dying.
Ooh,
And
yeah.
I am constantly so impressed because to be able to do that, not only does it look prettier, which is, I guess, why circus people are doing it because it's a performance, but like
Yes.
it's that focus of the tension where you want it to be. And like it's the tension's no use to me in my face. My face isn't
I don't
helping.
need, yeah, I don't need my jaw. Like, right, I don't need more TMJ symptoms. I don't need my jaw to help me do a deadlift. I'm sorry. I just don't.
So if you can like not spend energy on your face and put all of the energy in like your glutes or your adductors or whatever, then you can spend more energy on the stuff that you're trying to do. So if
Mhm.
I ever figure out how to do that, that'll be cool.
Here's the fun one. There are more muscles engaged when you're smiling than when you're frowning. So especially if you're somebody who kind of like puts on the metal while you're lifting, if you just hit that nice like metal head frown, you're using less energy than if you're doing the ballet smile.
Okay, well that's good to know. What's the coolest feat of flexibility or strength that you've done before?
Oh man. Okay. So when I was at school, I fully got my head sit. So you're like on the ground like this, like your chest is on the ground, and then you kick your feet over your head. And you can either put your feet on your head, you can put your feet on the ground in front of your face. And then if you continue even further, you can get your butt on your head. And the first time I got it, I was like, it feels like a pillow. Like it was the funniest. It's so nice and soft. Like it was just a very funny time. I'm sitting here trying to breathe while folded in half. My butt is on my head, and I'm just like, oh, that's lovely, actually.
Gosh, that's very cool. Your neck must be so strong to be able to hold you in that position and not like snap.
Yes. So the flexibility is super necessary. If you have enough upper back flexibility, the goal for that position is to be on your chest and to not have the ground touching your chin. Right? So if you can get the thoracic spine to open, if you can sweep the shoulder blades out of the way, you're sitting here on the chest, right? A collarbones chest area. And if you have enough flexibility, you can lift the neck up off the floor and not be just completely pressing on the cervical spine. So there is a lot of overuse of the cervical spine when pushing into those positions before people are fully ready. But we try to offload it as much as possible. I wrestled in high school. I was the only girl on the men's wrestling team, which is just such a like baby trans thing to do, I swear. When I came out, I was like, why were you surprised, parents? Like, I fought so hard to wrestle on the boys' team. But we built so much neck strength in that sport that for me, I attribute a lot of my ease of training in the future to having built that neck strength. So I try to incorporate it.
Wrestling's really, really great for building like strong necks, but also that flexibility through your spine. Like wrestlers do a lot of back bending.
We would do bridges in our warm up and we would do cartwheels and stuff. Like I had a wild coach. He was incredible. But yeah, I felt like I was doing a gymnastics warm up. I would say my favorite strength thing, I mean, aside from the strength that it takes to do contortion, because there's a lot of strength into pulling yourself into those positions. Um, I love my handstands. My handstands aren't amazing, but they're super fun. I'm always proud of being able to hold my body like that. My barbell overhead press, not a push press, like just a strict press, I got it to 100 pounds.
It's 100 pounds in English.
Like 40 something kilos.
That's very strong.
Right? I was super proud of it. And the funny part is at the time, all of my major lifts were all 100 pounds. They were all 42 kilos, right? It was like my bench press, my deadlift, my squat, and my overhead press were all 42 kilos. And
That
I was
doesn't
like,
make any
this
sense.
is not how this is supposed to work, right? It makes no sense whatsoever. But I had a bunch of like hip and SI joint instability that meant I couldn't progress my deadlift. And so I was sitting here with all this like fitness knowledge going, this is so not correct. Like, this is not the norm. This is not how these are supposed to scale. And I was like, I gotta go to some physio and figure out my hip because like I weigh 170 pounds. And so I was like, this is not, I should be able to deadlift my body weight if I can overhead press. It was wild, but very proud of that overhead press. And since then, that has transformed the way I look at scaling my students' handstands. So I always test their overhead press because I'm like, look, you weigh somewhere between 100 and 200 pounds. If you're overhead pressing a 10-pound dumbbell and you're struggling, what makes you think that your handstand is going to do anything at all? Like, what makes you think you can kick up and hold that? That's your body weight. So, yeah, I don't need you to strict press your body weight to do a handstand. But imagine you were standing, like reaching up to the sky, you brace your whole body, and somebody sets your body weight on the barbell on top of you. That's your handstand. That's what you're doing. So, that's been really fun to kind of have that inform how I go about teaching handstands and how I go about building up my students' strength as they progress through handstand training.
I like that you're mixing the strength stuff in with the more bodyweight circus stuff. I feel like it's super important, especially I think for everyone. I mean, I guess I'm biased because I'm a gym bro,
Yeah.
but I think for everyone, really important, but like especially for people if they're hypermobile and especially for people who are like super flexible. If you're a
Yeah.
performer, like it's your job to
Yes.
keep performing. If you can stay strong, you're going to be able to keep performing for much longer than if you don't.
There's an older idea that dancers don't need to lift because they're doing all their workouts in rehearsal. And then it started progressing to where, okay, well, you don't ever, and this is kind of like a woman thing too. They were like, oh, women don't ever need to lift more than their body weight, or dancers, you don't need to lift more than your body weight. Once you get your deadlift to your body weight, you're fine, right? Except, have you seen ballerinas jump? The force production, right? And then that force upon landing, that is more than your body weight. So that's telling me we need to build up our dancers so that their squat is 1.2, 1.5 times their body weight. And it'll take time, but then when you see that applied to the stage, it is incredible.
We made some really huge strides in strength training for women specifically over the last 10 years, where people have decided that getting stronger is actually a good thing and building muscle is actually a good thing. And I really hope that as fascism rises and skinny talk returns, it
Yes.
doesn't drag everybody back down because
It is
it's such
really
a
unfortunate.
shame.
I was going to say it is totally fascism. Like, fascism and skinny talk is back in full force. And it's really sad to see it coming back, but I do think we made such huge gains in the public sphere that the people who rode that initial wave into the gym and into strength training, especially the women, a lot of them are stuck. They're like, no, we're here. Our minds have been changed. We've found the light, and they're not going to be swayed. And so I do think while there is a lot of pushback, I almost think it's really loud on social media because it's a propaganda tool, not necessarily because individuals are going backwards. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. That's how I stay hopeful about this. In reality, we haven't lost gym membership. The gals are still lifting, and it's been really good.
Where can everybody find you if they want to find you on the interwebs and ask you more about contortion and flexibility?
I am Twisted Fox Training. So I am mostly on Instagram. You can find me at Twisted Fox Training. You can find me at twistedfoxtraining.com, Twisted Fox Training at Gmail, all of the things. Please come say hi. I have definitely, especially while trying to get all my chronic illness stuff under control, I've not been posting a lot. So honestly, here's my call out. If somebody comes into my DMs and asks me a question, because people feel so bad asking for like their questions to be answered for free, ask me and then I'll try to make content out of it. Like, that will be helping me, to be honest, getting back into that like posting thing. I do online personal training mostly for my hypermobile folks. It's been really fun. It's been hypermobile like dancers and performing artists that find me, and then it ends up being like, oh, I'm going to send my mom to you because she's who I got this from. So I've collected these like 30 something artists, and then they're like 60 to 70-year-old moms, which is a super sweet, fun thing for my
That's
business
so
to take a
nice.
turn to.
love training women in their 60s and
So
beyond,
much fun.
because their generation would have been told not to do any exercise, and they might have done like maybe some aerobics, maybe some running, and
Yes.
getting 60-year-old women doing like Zercher deadlifts and one arm overhead squats, when they look at it and they're like, Penny, what the fuck? You're insane. How am I meant to do that? And then they do it.
And then they do it.
And that is
And
the
then they're
coolest
like,
thing in the
I'm a
world.
badass. It's so
Yeah.
much fun.
Because
So
I
much
think
fun.
it's so important for older women to be lifting weights and doing some exercise. Because if you don't, the next 10 to 30 years, however long you're still going to be alive for, are going to be measurably more difficult
Yes.
than if you just do some lifting now.
I am now doing online sessions that are specifically, let's talk about your symptoms, let's talk about what you're going through, so that I can say, yes, this does fit this. It's a kind of a connect the dots, like medical advocacy session that I've been doing with people, where you might have so much freaking brain fog due to whatever you're experiencing. How are you supposed to do all that research yourself, read all this stuff, call a bunch of doctors, right? So on and so forth. And I have lists of, here is these symptoms that match this disorder. Here's the diagnostic criteria of these 5 things. And so it's like, here, I will email you this PDF. I think this is what you should talk to your doctor about next. Take the diagnostic criteria to them in case they don't understand it, right? Take that paper to them already filled out, because we filled it out together. I can't diagnose you, but I can get you so ready to advocate for yourself at your physician's office. So just getting people ready to come to their provider and be fully ready to advocate for themselves, have all of the information available. And then, yeah, let you and your physician make all of the final judgment calls on all those things. I'm not trying to offer a diagnosis or tell people medications to be adding, but we can kind of give people that package to show up and be a little less scared of the physician's office and a little more empowered while they're there.
Sounds super interesting. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you everyone for listening to the episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. And if you did enjoy it, make sure to follow and subscribe and rate it 5 stars, because apparently that's helpful. So thanks. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Penny. It's so good to meet you. I think I've been following you for a couple years, and this was just a treat. Thank you so much.